Hi guys, in this lens review, we're going to be reviewing Canon's latest telephoto zoom lens, the Canon RF-70 to 200mm f2.8L IS USM lens. And I'm going to start right now. When it comes to zoom lenses, there's one that I recommend over all others, and that is a 70 to 200mm. Doesn't matter what brand, and to be honest with you, it doesn't matter what type of photographer you are. If you're a landscape photographer, portrait photographer, event photographer, wedding photographer, if you don't own a 70 to 200mm, I highly recommend buying one. But do I recommend buying this one? Because it is very expensive. Let's find out in this lens review by firstly looking at the overall build quality and the design of the lens. Now, like most RF lenses out there, they have a slight redesign over their EF equivalent, and this lens is no exception. First of all, this lens comes with 17 elements in 13 groups, which actually makes it a fairly simple optical formula versus the older EF equivalent, which makes it a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter. As well, you also got a lot of customization with this lens, with 4 custom buttons. So you've got a focus limiter switch on the top, as well as an autofocus to manual focus switch. You've also got an image stabilization on and off, and you've also got 3 image stabilization modes. Mode 1 is general use, general panning, to be honest with you. It's the mode that I recommend. Mode 2 is for panning and tracking subjects. So if you're following a car left to right, or maybe you're following an object going up and down, it's a little bit more successful with that. And then mode 3 only turns on the image stabilization when you half press the shutter button. This is great maybe if you're following a bird that's a little bit erratic. It helps you get a better composition. Now, you've also got a control ring as well with this lens, which is close to the base of the lens. This is really nice. It allows you to basically change certain custom functions within the camera. You can have it connected to aperture, shutter speed, ISO. I've actually got mine connected to white balance, which is great when you're going from an inside to an outside environment. Above that, you've got your focus ring. Now, this is electronically coupled to the focus motor. It's fairly smooth. It's not my favorite. I love a clutch mechanism when it's actually mechanically connected to the autofocus. But to be honest with you, this is quite smooth and easy to use. And then above that, you've got your zoom ring. Now, this lens versus other 70 to 200mm is externally zooming, which means when you go in 70mm, and then it gets longer when you zoom to 200mm, which when it's in your bag, it's far smaller and far lighter. The only downside really I can see is maybe some moisture or some sand can actually get in between the optics here. It hasn't happened to me, and I've taken it all over the world, so I'm not going to be marking it down. It's just something definitely to take into consideration. But this lens also comes with a tripod collar, but it's also removable due to its size and weight. You don't always need to use it, so it's removable, which is quite nice. It's also got a lens hood, and it comes with a lens pouch in the box. To be honest with you, this is probably the best built 70 to 200mm lens I have ever tested. And with the range of customization, as well as offering weather sealing, I just can't fault this lens in any way when it comes to the build quality. So because of that, I'm going to be giving it the full marks, the 10 out of 10. Right, so let's move on to the all-important image quality. And is this lens worth buying when it comes to its optical design? Because I must say, a 70 to 200mm is incredibly versatile, and it's really important to get the best of the best, especially if you're a professional photographer. So let's work out if this is one. So I took this lens to Northern Ireland and did a little bit of landscape work, something that I actually really like with a 70 to 200mm. It's very versatile, from medium telephoto all the way to super telephoto. Now, something I really noticed with this lens is the colors and the contrast, especially when you're shooting into direct sunlight. I found the flaring was really nice. It actually looked really, really beautiful, as well as I found that the colors were really punchy, and also thought the sharpness was really good as well. I really liked the photos from this trip, and I pretty much shot it all on this RF-70 to 200mm. But let's look a little bit more scientifically at the graph images. Right, so let's start off with sharpness, and we're going to go shoot 70mm wide open at f2.8. Now, if we go ahead and zoom into the corner and also the center, you can see there is great sharpness right out the gate, which is really nice. The center is really sharp, and the corners are just a little bit softer with a little bit less contrast. Now, if we step down to f4, you can definitely see that the corners brighten up slightly, and I would also say the corners sharpen up a little bit more, which is really nice, and the center stays nice and pinned sharp. Then if we go to f5.6, this is where this lens truly shows its sharpness, where the center and the corners are just as sharp as each other, which is really impressive. Then if we go to f8, it's the same story, and to be honest, it doesn't really improve from there. It is almost perfect, all the way up to f11, where the corners and the center get a little bit softer just due to diffraction, and it's the same situation, but a little bit worse at f16, but that's usual for most lenses. So let's go ahead and zoom in at 200 millimeters. Well, to be honest with you, it's pretty much the same story. 200 millimeters, wide open at f2.8. It is really sharp in the center and in the corners. You'll notice the corners aren't the sharpest straight out of the gate, but they are still very sharp, wide open, and also they're a little bit darker as well. To brighten them up and to sharpen them up a little bit more, step down to f4, and I would say they get super sharp at f5.6. And again, no noticeable improvement all the way through the range until you get to around f11, where they soften up a bit, again, just due to diffraction, and it's the same situation with f16. So a really good score for this lens, one of the sharpest telephoto zoom lenses on the market. Right, so let's move over to distortion and vignetting. So let's test it at 70 millimeters first. So wide open, you can see there's a small amount of barrel distortion with a small amount of vignetting. Now, if we step down to f4, we push that vignetting right into the corners. It completely disappears at f5.6, and f8, there is no vignetting to be seen, which is really nice. Now at 200 millimeters, that barrel distortion turns into mild pincushion distortion. And as you can see, wide open, there is a little bit of vignetting. But again, you can push that vignetting right to the corners in f4, and it completely disappears at f5.6 and at f8. So for distortion and vignetting, it's a fairly average score, although I would say it's above average for other super telephoto zoom lenses. Now for its macro ability, I would also say it's really good as well, with a minimum focus distance of just 70 centimeters, with a maximum reproduction ratio of 0.23, which is actually really impressive for a telephoto zoom lens. And there's also very little chromatic aberration, both at f2.8, at f4, f5.6, and at f8. So yeah, a really impressive score when it comes to macro. One of the best lenses for macro when it comes to its telephoto zoom range. So as you can see, this lens is almost optically perfect. One of the sharpest telephoto zoom lenses, one of the best when it comes to distortion and vignetting, and having that minimum focus distance, this lens is exceptional. And it also offers really good bokeh and background separation. With a 9-bladed rounded aperture diaphragm, this is great if you're wanting to really separate the foreground and background. So if you're a portrait photographer or if you're a wedding photographer, I highly recommend this lens. To be honest with you, this is one of the best optically performing lenses I have seen on this channel. So because of that, I'm going to be giving it the full marks, the 10 out of 10. Right, so let's move on to the size and weight of this lens. Now, something that I really like about this lens is it is an externally zooming lens. Now, a lot of people will love that, a few people will hate that, but the big benefit, it's far smaller and far lighter than the EF equivalent. Now, this lens comes in at just over a kilogram, coming in at 1,070 grams, which when you compare it to the EF 70-200mm f2.8 Mark III, that comes in at 1.44 kilos. So it's about 400 grams lighter than the EF equivalent. It's also far smaller as well. As you can see by the size chart here, you can see we've got the 70-200mm Mark IV, the 70-200mm 2.8, then you've got the EF version towering above the other two lenses. So yeah, this lens is incredibly small. Not as small as the f4 version, which comes in at 695 grams, but for a 2.8 lens, this is the smallest on the market. Smaller than the Sony one, smaller than the Nikon. This lens is just, if you're after a small telephoto zoom lens, look no further than this lens here. It is remarkable. As well as it's got a filter thread of just 77mm when you compare it to the EF version of 82mm. So because of that, I'm going to be giving it a 9 out of 10 for size and weight. Right, so let's move on to the autofocus and image stabilization and what this lens is like when we're using it for video. Now this lens has an unbelievably fast autofocus motor thanks to its dual USM motors. It's actually one of the fastest lenses I have reviewed on this channel when it comes to its autofocus. It's almost as fast as just simply pressing a button. It's like it's instantaneous, like it's not even connected, it's some kind of magic going on inside the lens. Really impressive. And if you do have some hunting issues, which can happen in low contrast areas, you know, it's still fairly fast, but it can sometimes hunt a little bit, but it's a lot more precise than the EF-70-200mm Mark III. So if you like that lens, you're gonna absolutely love this lens. As well as it has amazing image stabilization, up to 5 stops of compensation, which is great for video. And as you can see by some of the sample video we've got here, this lens is great if you want to put it on a gimbal because of how small and lightweight it is, although it does take a little bit of time to balance, but it's also great for tripod work as well with that tripod collar. So overall, to be honest with you, you can't ask more for a lens like this. It's great for photography, it's great for video, amazing autofocus and amazing image stabilization. So there's nothing else I can give it than the full marks, the 10 out of 10. Right, so we've talked about the amazing image quality, the amazing size and weight, and the unbelievably fast autofocus. What are Canon asking for? Well, this is where this lens kind of lets itself down thanks to its incredibly high price point, coming in at £2,729. But if you're lucky enough to find one secondhand, you'll be looking around £2,200 to £2,300. Still very, very expensive. When we compare it to the other RF lens, the 70-200mm f4, that comes in a little bit better value for money at £1,589, with a second-hand value around £1,200 to £1,300. Still very, very expensive. The other lens we compare it to today is the EF-70-200mm Mark III, the lens you've probably got already if you're thinking of upgrading. That comes in at £2,149, with a second-hand value of around £1,100 to £1,300, depending on where you look. So the only real downside to this lens is the incredibly high price point. And to be honest with you, it can put it off for a lot of people. I would personally love to own this lens, but for me at this moment in time, far exceeds my budget. So because of that, I'm only going to be able to giving it a 4 out of 10 for price. Right guys, so let's quickly move on to the pros and cons to firstly work out if this lens is worth a spot on your camera bag, but also who is this lens designed for. Let's firstly look at the pros first. First thing to mention is the amazing build quality of this lens and the overall customization. Really well built, and with that weather sealing, you can take it anywhere. It also has amazing image quality, one of the sharpest 70-200mm lenses that you could possibly buy on the market. It's also one of the smallest as well, thanks to that new external zooming design. Really small and really lightweight for an f2.8 70-200mm. It also has an amazing macro ability with a minimum focus distance of just 70 centimeters, adding another versatile feature to this lens. It also has one of the fastest autofocus motors I have ever tested, almost instantaneous. And lastly is the amazing image stabilization. This has got a really smooth and amazing image stabilization system, which is great for low lit photography as well as amazing for video. Right, so let's quickly talk about the cons of this lens and why maybe other lenses are better suited for your type of photography. First thing to mention is that externally zooming feature. Now I love it because it really does reduce the size and weight, but it could get a little bit of dust or maybe a little bit of water in that small crack around the edge of the barrel. Something that you won't get with the EF-70-200mm because it is an internally zooming lens, which means you can fully weather seal it. I haven't had a problem so far, but it's something you could run into in a moisture-rich environment. And lastly, it's just super duper expensive and out of budget for almost every type of photographer. Personally, I would love this lens, but I don't think I'm ever going to own it because of the incredibly high price point. Brilliant, so there we go guys. So there is my in-depth lens review of the new RF-70-200mm f2.8. Now I was really impressed with this lens. I thought I'm going to say it's the best 70-200mm lens I have tested on this channel and that I have ever used. And I've used Fujifilm, Nikon, Sony, and this one really did stand out Firstly, for that amazing build quality, the amazing image quality, it's the smallest and lightest f2 lens out there on the market, as well as having the fastest autofocus I think I've ever tested, and that buttery smooth image stabilization. And with an overall score of 43 out of 50, this is a highly recommended lens. The only really downside and the massive elephant in the room is that price. But if you can get over that, and if you're a professional photographer and you don't mind about price, you just want the best of the best, look no further than the Canon RF-70-200mm f2.8. Well, thank you for sticking to the end of this video. I hope you found it informative. And make sure to write down in the comments below, do you want to buy this lens or do you already own it? I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Now, of course, if you're interested in any other lens review, I've got my playlist just up here. I also do Photoshop tutorials as well. I'll make sure to link that up here as well. I've been James for Photo Fever, and I'll catch you guys next time.